Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to the dinner break series here in Pakistan. This is our second dinner. Well, it's actually we had a tea break series, and now we've transformed it into a dinner break series, which will be held at 8 p.m. Once a month. And the goal here is to feature someone from Pakistan and myself and some biosafety topic professional development opportunities. That's our goal. And don't worry, we're going to be sending out invitations. And it's like I said, I'm very, very happy to have you. We have over 60 people on this conversation tonight, and all in essence trying to learn a little bit about intrinsic safety programs. Now, I did market this as the difference between kind of punishment and serving, or service and punishment, or punishment and consulting. Let's not get caught up in those words. I'm going to explain exactly what I mean and why it's important in biosafety. I will tell you that in the years that I've been serving in Pakistan, it's not abnormal. I've seen a lot of people believe in this construct of punishment, that when someone does something wrong, we really, in essence, do need to punish them. And I will tell you that punishment does two things. It does two things. Number one, it lets someone know that when they've done something that isn't acceptable. And number two, it's kind of associated with you will be held accountable if you choose to do this behavior. So if you act this way, this is what's going to happen to you. Now, beyond that, punishment from the term of psychology, which aims to stop behavior, has not been deemed very successful in stopping behavior. In fact, what punishment does do is it builds resentment, it hides true behavior, and last but not least, it teaches nothing new. So what I'm going to teach you today is I'm going to teach you a technique that you can use in biosafety, and I'm going to teach you a way that you can actually do your best in making sure that you motivate individuals to practice safety from within rather than from outside, because biosafety is never going to have the resources it needs. It'll never have the resources it needs to babysit scientists. Scientists are going to have to be intrinsically motivated to behave for themselves. And so as you begin to start or serve in the profession of biosafety, I want to give you some tips on how you can motivate individuals to want to be safe rather than you babysitting them and making them be safe. Okay, so again, ladies and gentlemen, forgive the background. I apologize. I am here in Islamabad. It is actually 8:08 p.m., so I'm not back in the United States. I'm here in Islamabad. It's good to be back, and so forgive the hotel in the background, but it's good to be back here in Pakistan, and good to be back serving in Pakistan as well. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I do want to dialogue. If you do have any questions, please make sure that you put them in the chat box. I'm very happy to answer questions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for a long time, and I think this is a very, very important aspect, I trained the workforce. And when I trained the workforce, a very, very important construct or concept really kind of came out of this training. I believed that if I trained the workforce and I were to spend time with the workforce, I believed in essence that, well, to be honest with you, that if the workforce was adequately trained, then to be honest with you, they could be safe in a laboratory environment. What I learned in 2014 was that after 10 years of training people in biosafety laboratories, I learned that, quite honestly, just training the workforce is never going to be enough. And I know many of you out there that are listening to this, I have trained. And trust me, I believe in the impact of training. But what I realized in 2014 was that the workforce alone is not going to be able to produce what the most important aspect in biosafety is, and that is a culture of safety. A culture of safety is a blending of both the safety professional, leadership, and the workforce. And typically, we don't have a problem engaging the safety official. Most of the time, the safety official wants to be safe because, well, quite honestly, they're promoting biosafety. The scientist will engage, some will engage freely, others will have to be forced to engage. But the reality is that if leadership is not involved, and so listen, if you have leaders that you want to show this presentation to, give them the YouTube link after this. I'm going to be posting it. But if you're a leader and you're listening to this, we need you involved in safety. Without your involvement in safety, quite honestly, we're never going to get the workforce to where it needs to be to practice safer behaviors. So on July 16th, I was subpoenaed and called to testify in Congress about an anthrax event that occurred at CDC. And as a result of that anthrax event that occurred at CDC, even though it was an unintentional incident or accident, the scientist involved in this incident was removed or fired from their position. And this is never a good thing in science. And the reason why it's not a good thing in science is that when you begin terminating people from making mistakes, what happens is they begin to hide the behaviors, they begin to hide their incidents. And even though you think you're in a safe organization, because everybody's afraid of losing their job, they're not telling you when something goes wrong. So this is a very, very important lecture when it comes to trying to understand the human being and understand what motivates us to, in essence, not only work safer, but be transparent and honest about the incidents and mistakes that we make in the lab. So I'm going to start by saying, look, leaders prepare, protect, and promote the workforce. Leaders care. Now let me explain what that means. Leaders prepare the workforce in two ways. The first way they do is they give the workforce resources. So they provide resources to the workforce, and then not only do they provide resources, they also provide training and expectations. So when you look at what a leader does in an organization specific to biosafety or specific to laboratory safety, the three things they provide are they're going to provide resources. When they provide those resources, they need to establish expectations. And then in addition to establishing the expectations, they have to, in essence, make sure that people have the training. Okay, so if leaders don't make sure people have training, expectations, and resources, quite honestly, you're not prepared to work in a biosafety or a biological laboratory. Now, that's the first phase of leadership, is preparing the workforce. The next phase of leadership is protecting the workforce. Let me explain what that means. Protecting the workforce is a two-phased process. The first phase leadership tends to understand, which is that when someone is trying to do the work, so let me get this straight. When a mistake or an incident happens, leaders protect the workforce by protecting the employees who are actually trying to comply with the SOPs. Now, this is very weird. Listen to what I'm saying here. Leaders protect the workforce by not firing, scrutinizing, embarrassing individuals that make honest mistakes. Rather than that, leaders support those individuals that make mistakes. They use those mistakes to learn and improve the overall organization, and they don't scrutinize, fire, or punish individuals who are actually making an effort to be safe in the organization. Now, the second aspect of protect is very, very critical. And what I mean by that is if someone in the organization is choosing not to follow safer behaviors, they're not following the guidelines, they're not following the family rules, they're not following the house rules, and they're choosing to use their own rules, and that means that they don't care what the house says, they don't care what the rules are, they're going to do what they want to do when they want to do it. Leadership protects the workforce from those individuals. When someone is being insubordinate and throwing out the house rules, leaders step in and say, you will follow those rules or you will no longer work here. And the reason why leaders do this is that when we talk about safety, our safety is only as good as the people who are working around us. If we think that we can work in a bubble and be safe in a bubble, that's an inappropriate concept or theory or even thought process. Our safety doesn't only rely on our behavior, our safety relies on the behaviors of those around us as well. So leaders protect the workforce by not embarrassing, scrutinizing, or firing individuals who make honest mistakes, because we are human, we will make mistakes, but they also protect the workforce from those individuals who are insubordinate, choosing to break the rules and not listening and not complying with safer guidelines and policies. Now, last but not least, leaders make a concerted effort to provide feedback, or what we like to say, promote the workforce. Not promote the workforce from a job standpoint, but when they see that the workforce is doing something right, they say something. And when they see that the workforce is not doing something right, they say something. And what do I mean by that? Promotion can be negative and it can be positive. Positive promotion means you are trying and succeeding. That's the key. You are trying and succeeding. Negative promotion means you're trying, but you're not quite there. We're going to recognize your effort, but you're not quite where you need to be. the fact that you're trying means that you're going to have a job. You're going to continue to have a role in this organization. It's when you choose not to try with policies and procedures that you pose a risk to others in that laboratory environment. So the key is leaders prepare, protect, and promote the workforce. In essence, leaders care. And what does that mean? Leaders ensure compliance that they're trying through accountability, positive and negative, that they're actually doing it right, when they give the workforce resources and establish expectations. So again, they ensure compliance through accountability when with resources and expectations. We'll talk a little bit about what that means a little bit later, okay? And please feel free to ask questions. I do, and I will take questions as we get towards the end of it, because unfortunately I'm getting old and I need my glasses to read. And so the reality is that I'm going to have to take questions and comments towards the end. So forgive me for that at this point. But please write them down and get ready, and I'll make sure to address every question that I can. Okay. Leadership is not about the number of people you lead. It's the number of leaders you create. Now, I want you to take this motto. And if you're a biosafety professional, I want you to really apply this motto to yourself as a biosafety professional. Take out the word leadership, and I want you to put in the word biosafety. So say biosafety is not about the number of people you lead. It is about the number of biosafety professionals you create. Now, why am I saying this? Well, here's the problem with biosafety. Biosafety as a profession is managing the unmanageable. And sometimes we kind of feel like this as biosafety professionals. We want to put our head in the sand and just pretend like nothing's happening. You have long hours, high workloads, limited resources, immediate deadlines. You feel undervalued, and 9 times out of 10 you are. You have a lack of control over your day, and quite honestly, you're dealing with multiple personalities. Now, when you look at this job that biosafety professionals have, it is a very unforgiving job. This is a job that causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress for individuals who are working in the laboratory, because all they're trying to do is keep laboratory scientists safe, but for some strange reason, they're seen as barriers to science. And things begin to happen, and quite honestly, it begins to take a toll on these biosafety professionals. And I want to remind you that if you are listening to this and you are a biosafety professional, I want to remind you that I need you for the marathon. I don't need you for a sprint. I need you for a career. And so when you look at biosafety and you look at how you're going to practice your profession, I want you to realize, and it's very, very important that you understand this, that when you practice biosafety, don't get stuck in the weeds. Don't let the negativity bring you down. Don't let people put you down. Simply continue to serve those who want to be served. And when someone doesn't want to be served, dust your hands off and move to those who want to listen to what you have to say. You can't make people listen, and you can't train people who already know everything. That's a very, very important aspect. Now, when we talk about leadership and we talk about biosafety, there are 4 primary controls. We talked about this last month, and those are engineering, personal protective equipment, standard operating procedures, and last but not least is this concept of training. Or leadership controls. Leadership controls consist of training that goes well beyond PowerPoint, SOP compliance, making sure that people are actually following SOPs. Look, an SOP with no SOP compliance is not a plan. People are not going to follow it. People will not follow rules that you don't police, or what I mean by policing, at least hold people accountable for. Okay, you've got SOP evaluation and validation, making sure that the SOPs actually work. Medical surveillance, making sure your workforce stays healthy. Incident surveillance, making sure that you're constantly improving. When there's an incident that occurs in a lab, you have an opportunity to improve your overall skills and abilities. So remember that when you have an incident in the lab, should be not seen as a negative aspect. It should be seen as an opportunity to improve your overall processes. And last but not least, making sure that people who do work at the lab are really the ones that should be working in a lab with proper background checks. Okay? Now, we've talked a little bit about leadership. Let's talk a little bit about what this concept of serving is. Okay? Now, the bridge between plans and outcomes, meaning the gap between plans and outcomes, you have effective plans and you have the desire of safer outcomes. But the reality is that it's behavior that connects these two. I know a lot of people who I've done work with from a counseling standpoint or from a coaching standpoint who will have a plan for losing weight. Their outcome is to lose 15 pounds in 3 months. Their plan is to exercise and to eat healthy and to do a wide variety of things. But here's the deal. Even though they have an exceptional plan, and even though they have a clearly measurable outcome, the reality is that they don't participate in the behaviors, and as a result of not participating in the behaviors, they don't achieve their overall outcome, even though they have a phenomenal plan. Now, this is the problem that we see at a lot of institutions. Many institutions will have exceptional SOPs and they'll have great desired outcomes, but because the people in the laboratory are not participating in the SOPs or doing the SOPs accordingly, we sometimes have risky behaviors and we sometimes have negative outcomes in laboratory environments. So we have to understand the importance of behavior in overall safety. And there's a wide variety of reasons why behavior matters, but I want to talk to you a little bit about how are we motivating behavior. Now, this is a very, very important aspect. If I ask you right now, what are you wanting most in life? Or I could even ask you, what are you wanting most specific to safety? The reality is that many of you are going to start thinking about ideas and concepts, and I want to encourage you to understand that new thinking leads to new behaviors. So when you ask somebody what they're wanting, this is an intrinsic question, you're basically transitioning from increasing the concept of dependency to increasing their overall capacity. Now listen to what I'm saying here, because this is critical here. As a biosafety professional, it feels good to be needed. And what do I mean by that? When we build dependency on us, it means that we are needed. It means that people, quite honestly, need us, and therefore we are irreplaceable in the job. So everybody likes to be needed. But here's the problem that we have. If you spend your time as a biosafety professional doing things for other people, meaning you're policing, that's kind of what you're doing. The question is, are you increasing dependency on you, or are you increasing the individual's capacity to do safety for themselves? This goes back to that old cliche that Gandhi wrote, which is, if I give you a fish, I feed you for a day. But if I teach you how to fish, I feed you for the rest of your life. And what I'm trying to get at here is that biosafety is not a profession that provides safety for people. It doesn't do safety to people. What you should consider in the profession of biosafety is you should consider doing biosafety with people and by people. Let's explain a little bit about what that means. Biosafety is always going to be resource limited. A biosafety officer is never going to have the resources to govern each individual who works in a laboratory environment. This means that safety must be self-governed. Scientists must self-govern themselves. And individuals must be intrinsically motivated to engage in safety workplace practices. What does that mean? Meaning we can't just babysit our scientists. We've got to encourage them and increase their capacity to, in essence, practice safety for themselves. Not rely on us for safety, but get them to practice safety independent of us. Now, there are 3 human risk factors that we need to talk about. The first human risk factor is what we call extrinsic, and that's that middle one. Now, an extrinsic motivating factor is like a biosafety officer who comes around. And what I mean by that, basically what happens is a biosafety officer comes in and they babysit. And because the biosafety officer is present, people behave. It's kind of equivalent to when you see a leader come in your lab, you behave differently than the way you normally do. You see a biosafety officer coming, you put your food in the drawer, you put your lab coat on, you put your shoes on, and if you can't, you run out of the lab. An extrinsic motivator is something that from the outside motivates us to behave and do things better as they are around or when they are around. Now, again, biosafety is never going to have the resources to babysit scientists, so extrinsic motivation is not going to be a good option for biosafety professionals. Then there's systemic motivation. Now, systemic motivation can compete with biosafety professionals. And what do I mean by that? Even if a biosafety officer says you should not eat in the laboratory, you should not sniff plates, you should not use cell phones in the lab, the minute that the laboratorian goes to that lab, they're going to watch other people's behaviors. And if other people are using the phone, sniffing plates, and eating in the laboratory, well, guess what? Even though the safety official said you shouldn't be doing these things, the reality is that the social norms of that laboratory is permitting those behaviors to occur, and people will be motivated to break the rules and motivated to follow those unsafe laboratory practices or unsafe behaviors. So systemic is the social norm, it's the culture, and that motivates people, meaning if the laboratory director or if the safety officer says you shouldn't be eating in the lab, but the laboratory director has donut day every Friday in the lab, that is a contrasting culture between science and safety, and as a result, people are going to follow those social norms in the laboratory environment. Now, the last aspect of motivation, which is absolutely critical, is what we call intrinsic. Now, intrinsic motivation means that rather than being motivated from the outside to do a particular behavior, you're being motivated from the inside. It's actually coming from within. You feel compelled to behave in a safer way because as you're motivated with intrinsic safety strategies, it's something that motivates you from inside out, not outside in. So you're motivated on the inside, and quite honestly, when you're intrinsically motivated, this is extremely powerful because a lot of people will want you to do different things, but when you're intrinsically motivated, you're motivated to do the right thing. You're motivated to do the safe thing. Now, what does intrinsic motivation look like? Well, first and foremost, if you're interested in trying to become an intrinsic motivator, and quite honestly, I'm hoping that all 74, I'm very proud, we got 74 people here. I'm hoping that all 74 of you decide that you want to be an intrinsic motivator. Now, this means that you can be an intrinsic motivator at home. You can be an intrinsic motivator at work. You can be an intrinsic motivator with your husband, your wife, your spouse, your partner. You can be an intrinsic motivator anywhere you want. And this is what an intrinsic motivator does. When you try to motivate someone intrinsically, you are going to become a food server. No, I'm not hiring you as a waiter, but you will become a waiter or a waitress. And I want you to imagine that you are serving people. That's the key. Because the minute you start saying, how may I serve you, you are automatically going to the intrinsic model of motivation. You do not label people as fix, because if you're going to fix a problem, that means that they're broken. And if you're going to help someone, it means that they're unable to do something. What you're going to do rather than fix something or help someone is you're going to actually serve someone. So change that word. I'm actually going to serve you. Now, what does service look like? I want you to imagine you're at a restaurant and you see a waiter. And the waiter comes up to the table, and you know, what are they doing? Are they actually trying to, you know, pick a food for you, or are they going to listen to you? So the second part of service is this, what we call this C3 factor. Now, this is a very, very new mentality for many people. Let me explain a little bit about what this mentality is. In order for you to practice this new mentality, you have to assume, and this is a bad word, but pay attention, bear with me. You're going to have to assume that the person you're serving is creative enough to develop a solution to a problem. They are capable enough to actually do that solution, and they're complete enough to get the parts that they need to make sure that it's appropriately done. Now, this is a huge assumption, because sometimes people are not ready. Sometimes people don't have the skills and abilities. They're not creative enough, and they also don't have the resources to do this. But what you're trying to do here is, and keep this in mind, it's very, very important that we understand this. What you're trying to do with intrinsic motivation is you're starting a new process of thinking, and new thinking begins to drive new behaving. So if I'm working with someone that I'm trying to change, and I consider them, they come up to me and they say, hey, Sean, really need help with an SOP for how to respond to a needle stick. the very first question I'm going to ask them is, well, what are you wanting to do when you get stuck by a needle? They may come up with an exceptional idea, even though I know protocols and I can rattle them off, and I've traveled the world and I've seen many different labs and many different protocols. Even though I have all these wonderful ideas, fact is I don't live in Pakistan. I don't belong to a lab in Pakistan. I don't know the people or the dynamics in that laboratory. And so why would I give somebody a solution that has worked for me in another place or another region of the world? It's better to actually say to someone, well, what are you wanting to do? And then as they begin to express their wants and their desires, you then as a intrinsic motivator can begin listening and asking them questions and facilitating a process that helps them solve the problem for themselves. And do you know what that does in psychology? If people solve the problem for themselves, they're more apt to follow the solution to the problem than they were if you just gave them an answer to the solution. Okay, so a new mentality. The intrinsic safety approach is one that increases the capacity within another individual to do safety for themselves. And it starts by transitioning from I'm fixing something or I'm helping someone to I'm actually serving someone. And when you serve them, you begin to position them in a role where they are creative enough to solve their own problems, capable enough to do that and get it done, and complete enough to find the resources they need to do so. Okay, and that is an assumption that you do have to make. And every once in a while, somebody may not be creative. And so what you do is you can give them a little idea, but then jump back and ask them, now that you know what I'm talking about, what are you wanting to do? Okay, all right. Now, when we look at the next slide here, your mission when it comes to intrinsic motivation, your mission is to be with you and by you. That's what your mission is, not to you and for you. There are many biosafety professionals in Pakistan that are excited that they have a role, and then they start doing things for the scientists. They start writing protocols. They start doing laboratory inspections, meaning the scientist looks at them and says, wait, I get to do science and you're going to do all my admin stuff? Oh, great, go ahead. If a scientist is no longer engaged in the safety policies and procedures or the admin aspects of safety, then quite honestly, all you're doing is having the safety officer do everything for the scientist, and the scientist isn't learning what safe looks like or what safe is. So your mission as a biosafety professional and as an intrinsic motivator is to be with people and by them. Rather than doing safety to them and for them, you're going to be with them and by them as you do biosafety, so that you begin to teach and they begin to learn exactly what biosafety looks like. Now, you can use intrinsic motivation or serving to increase the safety program capacity. It's very similar to a dining out experience. Intrinsic motivation puts individuals in control, and they like to be in control. Asking those who come to you, what are you wanting most specific to safety, is a very, very good idea. When someone comes to you and says, hey, I need a protocol or a plan for how to respond to a spill, instead of giving them an answer and showing them the manuals that I know many of you have, ask them, well, what do you want me to do? You may be blown away by their SOP. You may be blown away by what they say. But the reality is let them answer that question, because they may come back and go, I don't know, that's a tough question. Then say, I'll give you some time. When you're a waiter, if you go up to a table and someone says, I don't know what I want to order, you don't order for them. You don't tell them what they're going to order. You basically say, I'll give you some more time. So give them more time. Are those coming to you? What are you wanting most? Always ask that question. Ask them what that looks like when they get that formed. When you have somebody who's told you what they want, ask them what it looks like, to get them to describe in detail of what intrinsic of what they're looking for and what they're wanting. And then, what if they aren't creative, capable, or complete? Well, that happens. But what you do is, when someone's struggling, give them a little hint and then come back again and say, now that you know that, what are you wanting most in this moment right now? Okay, now what are some signs that you're practicing intrinsic motivation? Again, I want you to practice this at home. I want you to practice this everywhere. Intrinsic motivation is really a very, very powerful tool. If you ask a question, well, what are you wanting specific to whatever the topic may be, there's lots of silence. Lots of silence is a good thing. Don't be uncomfortable with silence, because silence means they're thinking. And when they're thinking, and this is an incredible aspect, when they're thinking, that means that they're getting ready to practice some new behaviors. If someone says, I don't know, just say, well, that's okay. I'll wait until you do. I want you to think about what you want to do, and I'll give you some time to think about it. Because after all, I'm not looking to solve the problem for you. I'm not looking to solve the problem to you. I'm looking to solve the problem with you and by you. And so I'm not the only one that's going to be speaking here. You're going to have to bring some stuff to the table. If you also experience this growing urge to jump in and offer solutions and insights, then you know you're practicing intrinsic safety as well. And what do I mean by that? So often, many of us who are consultants will have answers from around the world. We will have expertise, we'll have answers, we'll have creative solutions. But it does you absolutely no good if I come into your institution and I start doing things for you and to you. Because then when I leave, you won't understand why I did them. You won't be able to continue those efforts. And as a result, the program begins to slide and safety begins to take a hit. The reality is you want to, in essence, serve people right where they are. And you're going to continue to try to increase the capacity of the individual you're serving rather than doing safety for them and by them, or for them and to them. You're going to be doing safety with them and by them, right? Not to them and for them, okay? That's the goal. And you want to motivate each individual to begin to form a culture around these specific behaviors. Now, what are some organizational signs that you are implementing what we would consider intrinsic safety protocols? First and foremost, the biosafety officer review is reviewing SOPs. They are not writing them. If you are a biosafety professional and you're writing SOPs, that's a big problem. The reality is that you should not be writing them because you're not following them. The scientists are the ones that have to follow them. So the scientists should be the ones that are writing the SOPs. A biosafety officer is in a customer service position rather than a regulatory one. If you put a biosafety officer in a regulatory position, you're looking to set that biosafety officer up for failure, because now they won't be seen as a friend. They will be seen as a regulatory foe, and people want to be dishonest and won't necessarily talk about what's happening and be transparent. The laboratory director is facilitating annual laboratory inspections, self-initiated and highly reliable. Notice I said laboratory directors, not safety officers. You give the laboratory directors a checklist, you have them do a laboratory assessment, and then when they turn that assessment in, you take that assessment, don't look at it, put it in a folder, then you do your assessment that same day, and then you come back and you look at the differences between how a science lists the risk and how you list the risk, because your goal is to try and get on the same page as the scientist, and the scientist's goal is to try to get on the same page as you. It would be very helpful if the scientist learns how to see the laboratory through the lens of a safety official, thereby increasing someone's capacity to do safety rather than dependence on the safety professional to do it for them, okay? Your principal investigators are actually presenting to the IBC. They're not letting other people present to the IBC. And last but not least, if you have signed behavioral expectations or behavioral agreements about what staff are supposed to do when they're on the job, that would be very, very helpful. And again, these activities indicate a transfer of responsibility from the safety offices to the laboratory, an important transition for sustained safety laboratory practices in the end. Now, the measure of a leader is not the number of people who serve them, but the number of people they serve. And I have to tell you, one of the things that I have been very, very impressed with in Pakistan is the passion and the heart of BioPrism, the facilitators of BioPrism. They've been exceptional, and they've been extremely helpful and just outstanding in everything that they've done. So I want to say thank you to all those individuals. But the goal of this program, BioPrism, and even Lunch Break Series, is not to do biosafety with you, or I'm sorry, to you or for you, but it's about doing biosafety with you and by you, as was the BioPrism program. And it increased your confidence. And that confidence gave you the ability to stand up in front of people and talk. And that those talks keyed an interest in biosafety, which continued to perpetuate this flame that was so small at one time to a large bonfire, and a very, very healthy fire. So again, I want to say that the goal of intrinsic safety is to ensure, and this is very, very important, is to ensure that people, rather than doing safety to someone and for someone, they take a step back and they begin doing safety with someone and by someone. That's the key. That's the key in intrinsic safety. And again, it's a lot more fun, it requires a lot less energy, and you begin doing what people in science want to do alongside of you rather than being a potential obstructor to science. Okay? So ladies and gentlemen, just to ensure we have a little bit of privacy on questions, I'm going to end the recording at this point. I want to say thank you for attending this session. And now at this point, I will take some questions. Okay?